Most people delay retirement out of fear, even when they do have enough. And by the time they do retire, it could be many years later when they've spent some of their healthiest, most active years of their life working. The truth is, retiring early feels risky. But what if the real risk is waiting too long? Today, I'm going to be walking you through a case study of someone who has this exact question. Can I retire at 57 with 1.8 million saved and invested and make it last 30 to 40 years, or maybe even more? If you're in a similar position wondering if you've saved enough, you're not alone. There's a massive gap between what retirement looks like and the clarity that most of us have in our plan. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Joe. I'm a certified financial planner, and over the last 8 years, I've led hundreds of retirement planning consultations. In this video, you will get a completely free pass to explore how we helped one of our clients, Steve and Betty Wayne, as they were approaching retirement questions and navigating retirement strategy and the key decisions that they faced. We'll walk you through their story step by step. And I have scrubbed their names and some identifiable details, but this case is real. We'll be focusing on how they saved, what they missed, and exactly how we modeled their future to give them the real confidence they needed to know where they stand at this stage in their life. So let's meet Steve and Betty Wayne. Steve is 57, Betty is 49. There's a significant age gap there, and they have 2 boys, both of whom recently graduated from college and have jobs. And they currently live at home. Steve and Betty are supporting them by letting them live rent-free and get on their feet and save some money for their future. Additionally, Steve and Betty own 2 properties. Their primary residence, where the kids live, which is completely paid off, and a beach vacation home where they currently reside and where they hope to retire to. They plan to sell their primary home in the near future, and they're expecting about $100,000 in net proceeds after they've paid down their mortgage, which they can contribute towards their retirement portfolio. As far as income goes, Steve is the sole breadwinner with a strong income of $180,000 per year. He works as a project manager for a large tech company, and Betty is a stay-at-home mom and a homemaker. Outside of the $100,000 of home equity that they expect to pocket in their retirement portfolio, they have $1.7 million saved up and spread across different accounts. Steve has $700,000 in an IRA and $300,000 in his current employer 401k, which is spread across Roth and pre-tax. Steve also has $200,000 in an inherited IRA, which was inherited before 2019, so it's a stretch IRA, and they have $500,000 in their taxable brokerage account, which is invested in a couple of big tech stocks. After we broke down their balance sheet, we mapped out cash flows. When we mapped their expenses, Steve and Betty determined that they will need about $7,000 per month net of tax to enjoy their life on a day-to-day in retirement. And Steve just wants to step back from his stressful corporate job. We determined that they might do an additional $12,000 per year in spending and travel and leisure. Additionally, Steve and Betty emphasized that they want to continue to pay their mortgage and support their sons getting on their feet after college. And they wanted to know how this goal might affect their ability or inability to retire in the very near term. This is an additional cost that we projected at about $40,000 per year for each year that they delay selling their primary residence. Some of that would be made up with home equity, but the mortgage was relatively new, so it was mostly interest. We looked at their unique understandings, and Steve scored high on risk tolerance. But even so, he was unsure if it was feasible to retire, especially while holding a mortgage and supporting their children. This would create a withdrawal rate over 8% in those first couple years while they're keeping their mortgage, which was far above what Steve had read implied was considered safe as a withdrawal rate at around 4%. In addition to some uncertainty there, they were also unsure about the tax implications on their taxable brokerage account where they had large unrealized gains. They had read a lot about Roth conversions and tax strategy, but weren't exactly sure how this applied to their situation. And they wanted to retire early and were concerned about how healthcare costs would impact their plan. Additionally, they were concerned if their money could last 40 years, since Betty is only 49 and had longevity in her family. And lastly, they had highly concentrated tech stocks and so weren't sure how to balance the rest of their investments and allocations with that one position. Despite their strong savings and strong balance sheet, they were concerned that they might be retiring too soon and put their plan at risk long term. So if you're thinking that you might have some similar concerns or similarities in your situation to your plan, don't worry. I'm going to be showing you exactly how this analysis shakes out for the Wayne household, and you can relate that to you. When we first ran Steve and Betty's numbers through our retirement planning software, their baseline scenario with their current savings, current spending, and projected that into the future, we created a scenario that modeled out about 55% success probability. That means if we simulate their financial life 1,000 times with varying market returns, about 550 of those trials ended with them successfully having their money outlive them. Now, 55% might sound decent, but you probably wouldn't board a plane that only had a 55% probability of actually reaching its destination. So let's pause here and talk about what Monte Carlo actually is. Think about it like a big dice game. Every year of retirement, we roll the dice to see how markets might perform. Sometimes it does great, sometimes it stumbles. Monte Carlo testing rolls the dice thousands of times to see how your plan holds up under various market conditions. It's like asking, if things go a little haywire, how many versions of your future plan are you able to retire successfully and not run out of money early? But here's the key part. Monte Carlo can give us a good temperature reading on if the plan's holding up, but it won't tell us why it succeeds or why it failed. That's for us planners to really dig into the details and determine. So we broke down Steve and Betty's situation, where they could improve their spending efficiency, where their taxes might be dragging them down, and how their investment structure could potentially be improved to be more resilient. And with those changes, their new projected success rate jumped to over 90%. So let's walk through exactly what we changed to help them get there. So in our projections, we focused on several key variables that we could impact with our planning process. The first was an analysis of their portfolio drawdown percentages, just to determine how feasible their plan was. Next, we discussed how their income could be improved with portfolio-based guardrail strategies. Next, we reviewed their tax plan and created precision tax layer of suggested actions to improve their income tax efficiency. And lastly, we covered risk and portfolio allocations. After we completed the audit and analysis phase, the first thing was withdrawal rates. Withdrawal rates appeared high in those first years because of the current mortgage and dual property setup. They were set up to spend almost 9% of their portfolio in the first couple years while they were supporting their children. While I explained this, definitely it was not sustainable indefinitely. The withdrawal rate would decline significantly once their primary home is sold and mortgage paid off, reducing their living expenses. And their portfolio withdrawals would drop again significantly a second time when Steve was eligible and began to take his Social Security. Finally, at 15 years from now, Betty could take her Social Security. And when that happens, over 90% of their living expenses would be projected to be covered by fixed income sources from Social Security, meaning they would only need to withdraw about 1% of their projected portfolio at this stage. So while this withdrawal rate was very high early and does create some significant risks to be aware of, the average withdrawal rate through the projected 40 plus years of retirement retirement seemed more realistic. And this gave them the comfort they needed to see in a detailed feasibility plan around their retirement. Next, we introduced a strategy known as a guardrails-based approach to income generation. This method uses upper and lower spending triggers to determine withdrawal thresholds that are determined based on how the market or their spending is doing. If they go above or below expectations, a trigger can happen, meaning they need to adjust their portfolio spending range either up or down. This gives them flexibility without compromising the long-term sustainability in their plan. Basically, it works like this. If the portfolio reaches an upward trigger, we allow the portfolio income to increase to a new level, 10%. If the portfolio experiences a decline or overspending and they hit that lower level, we must aim to reduce their portfolio distributions to the lower guardrail, which is a reduction of 10%. If nothing happens, we can continue on our current pace and increase with inflation each year. Academic studies have suggested that this type of strategy, while it may be difficult to adhere to for some without a system in place, it can improve income distribution of a retirement portfolio by 10 to 20% without corresponding increase of risk to the same magnitude. This showed them there was possible room to spend above this portfolio limit for a year or two as long as the lower guardrail was not hit. They would not have to reduce their spending, but that overspending their prescribed income level for anything beyond 2 years did present potential critical risks and would likely trigger a lower guardrail to be hit. The third area we focused on after our audit and analysis phase of planning was our precision tax layer of planning. We modeled a variety of situations that Steve and Betty could take to realize their income in those first few years of retirement. We determined that the best plan would be that Steve and Betty could diversify their concentrated tech stock holdings in their taxable brokerage account and realize up to $96,000 in gains completely tax-free when they were retired. We also took into consideration the fact that they would be on a private healthcare plan, likely from an Affordable Care Act marketplace type healthcare plan, and that the subsidies for this plan could be a factor in our planning considerations and is something that we wanted to look into further. We emphasize that Steve's current tax rate is likely higher than it ever will be in retirement because he's still working and earning money. So we had him adjust his current mix of pre-tax and Roth contributions to 100% pre-tax. We showed him that his current 22% federal tax rate was higher than his potential future tax rates, and that there would be likely Roth conversion opportunities later on down the road at 0% or 10% or maybe 12%. This period is known as the Roth conversion window for possible retirement tax planning arbitrage. This is something we revisit once a year on a case-by-case basis and confirm our strategy for the next phase of execution. Ultimately, we reviewed a variety of different possible angles, and we determined that the unique plan for this couple in the upcoming year was to focus heavily on realizing their realized capital gains at 0% while keeping their gross income under $80,000, which would allow them to qualify for a significant Affordable Care Act subsidy. This would allow them to achieve their spending goals. And while we could have sold more stock and realized more capital gains at 0%, we determined that the subsidy that they received for keeping their income below that level actually outweighed the benefit of realizing more income and more 0% capital gains. We ran a side-by-side comparison and looked at both scenarios, estimating different things like risk and potential financial benefits from each approach, and brought it all together, determined that this was the most sensible path forward. As a side note, the Big Beautiful Bill Act changes some of the healthcare subsidies and how those are qualified for quite a bit. It goes from a sliding scale scale of subsidies to a cliff of subsidies. And so this is something to be extremely careful for if that's a part of your plan in upcoming years. Overall, our preliminary tax planning recommendations showed that the lifetime tax plan that we created a rough draft of had a projected value of over $300,000 in the course of their plan, assuming they're able to execute on that and stick to it throughout their retirement. Lastly, we crafted the life-aligned investment approach. Given that the Wayne household is planning to retire soon, we emphasized how critical the risk zone is just before and just after their retirement date. We developed a method of combating those risks in that window known as sequence of return risks. Sequence of return risk has a potential to really ruin a retirement plan if a retiree faces an adverse market environment that they're not prepared for in the 2 years before and 2 years after retirement. Oftentimes, people assume that nearing retirement means taking less risk, and that may be true for a lot of people, but if you're retiring early, it may be wise to maintain a stronger equity position than most people heading into retirement. The key is to move your portfolio into buckets. So if you have a target date fund or a balanced mutual fund with stocks and bonds in it, and you're trying to sell those funds for income, this presents unique risks in a down market because you could be forced to sell stocks while the market is down, locking in significant losses and presenting a very big risk into your plan. If you can separate the equity and the fixed income parts of your portfolio into separate buckets, we can create a dynamic funding strategy for your income. In this case, what we did was we developed a funding bucket of about 4 years worth of expenses, which we put into moderately conservative investments, and determined that at most they would need about $400,000 in that short-term bucket. And this would allow them to pull on something more stable if we faced harsher equity environments. Based on our calculation, we determined that the longer-term equity allocation could be as high as 80% without creating an excessive level of risk in their plan for sequence of returns. Given that their plan horizon was projected to be greater than 40 years due to the fact that Betty is 8 years younger, the higher equity allocation gives greater ability to outpace some of the more pernicious long-term effects of inflation over this long time period, even if it is at the expense of higher volatility. Surprisingly, the higher equity allocation paired with a segmented withdrawal strategy in different buckets gave them a better projected long-term return while insulating them from the critical sequence of withdrawal risks. We also agreed to sell their tech stock holdings first, which is their highest concentration positions. So even while we're maintaining a high equity allocation, their risk would be reduced year in, year out as we're selling from these concentrated positions. So overall, they were surprised to learn that their retirement was more viable than they expected. They did not think that they could retire based on the 4% rule and information that they had been reading online. But after seeing the sustainable withdrawal rate modeled out in different stages in a clear and logical way, they had the confidence that they needed to make their next step in their retirement. They were also surprised at how much healthcare and tax efficiency could impact their future plan. They were expecting to owe at least $10,000 in taxes per year. And in year one, we figured out a plan to help them realize the income they need from their accounts without any expected tax owed in the next year. They were relieved to see a plan that factored in the years ahead, balanced with the flexibility that they want now, without having fear that they would be creating too much risk down the road. So yes, Steve and Betty could afford to retire. For the first few years, they were planning to spend a little bit more than $10,000, and when they finally do sell their primary home, they'll be able to scale back their spending needs to about $7,000 per month. Peace of mind came from knowing that they could support the mortgage on their beach house temporarily and allow their sons more time to get on their feet. And they were confident that they could put their foot down when they need it. If their spending got out of control or the markets crashed, they were confident that they could sell that house at any point in time when they needed to. The tax planning created more efficiency to make the most of the dollars that they had already. And an adjustable Guardrails spending system could work with them to position their investments for retirement. It meant that they had clear contingencies even when they faced tough and uncertain market environments. So they would know exactly how to adjust and adapt to not put their plan too far at risk. This mindset shifted from fear to clarity and realized that structured planning turned an ambiguous future into clear and actionable steps and an outlook that they could feel confident in. If you want a clear picture of where you stand based on your goals, your income, your lifestyle, I would recommend that you click the link in the description below. It's our free retirement readiness tool. It will compare your plan against real retirement benchmarks to show exactly where you stand and if there's anything what might need your attention. I'll personally send you a 5-minute video